welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into historian Heather Cox Richardson's book, Democracy Awakening. And really, it tackles a question that feels incredibly urgent right now. How did a country, one that was once a global symbol of democracy, end up, in her words, teetering on the brink of authoritarianism?
And that right there, that's the central question the whole book sets out to answer. This isn't just about looking back at history for history's sake. It's about trying to understand our present moment. How did we get to this point? And, maybe more importantly, is there a way to change course?
Right off the bat, Richardson challenges a pretty common assumption. I think a lot of us imagine the end of democracy looking like a military coup, tanks in the streets. But the author argues the threat often doesn't arrive with a big bang. Instead, it moves quietly, and it uses the very political processes we trust to protect us.
Okay, so to really understand the book's argument, we're going to follow its structure. We'll start with the author's diagnosis of the problem, then dig into this core conflict she sees in American history, take a look at the so-called Authoritarian Playbook, and finally see what she proposes as the way forward. First up, the author starts by diagnosing the current moment, arguing that America is at a critical crossroads. And the book points to a decade where organizations that actually monitor democratic health all over the world noted a significant decline, even downgrading the U.S. from a full democracy to a flawed democracy. So to understand how this can even happen, the author looks at a question that has puzzled historians for decades. Why do people sometimes vote for leaders who end up taking away their own rights and freedoms? The book argues that figuring this out is absolutely key to understanding our current situation.
So what's really driving this crisis? Well, the book's core argument is that American history has never been some simple straight line of progress. Instead, it's been a constant tug-of-war between two totally competing ideas.
And according to the author, this is the central conflict. On one side, you have this really radical principle from the Declaration of Independence, equality and government by consent. On the other side, though, you've got this hierarchical worldview that insists some people are just naturally superior and are basically born to rule over everyone else. This is the foundational principle of American democracy. I mean, the idea that power isn't granted by God or by birthright, but that it actually flows from the people themselves. Back then, that was an astonishingly radical concept. But, as Richardson points out, there has always been a powerful counterargument. Just look at this example from George Fitzhugh, an elite enslaver writing before the Civil War. He explicitly rejects consent, arguing that force is the natural order. It really shows how this opposing idea has been present in America from the very beginning.
The author argues this conflict was basically baked into the nation's founding. You have this central paradox, proclaiming equality for some while enforcing profound inequality for women, indigenous peoples, and enslaved Black Americans. And it's that contradiction that she says left the door open for this hierarchical idea to just keep re-emerging throughout history.
So how does this hierarchical idea actually gain power? The book argues there's a specific pattern, a kind of authoritarian playbook that we see repeated again and again throughout history.
Richardson argues that authoritarian leaders don't rise to power by offering practical solutions. No, instead, they harness the powerful language of emotion and identity. They tell a story of a noble people who've been wronged. They invent enemies to blame, and they promise a return to a fictional, glorious past. And this narrative is so powerful because it offers simple answers to complex problems and gives people a real sense of belonging and purpose.
Now, the author makes a really crucial point about why this is so effective. See, once people buy into this narrative, it stops being about facts or policies. It becomes part of their identity. And to turn against the leader would feel like admitting that they were the ones who were wrong, and that's a psychologically difficult thing for pretty much anyone to do. So the next part of the book traces this tug-of-war, this conflict between equality and hierarchy through several key moments in American history. Richardson presents these moments not as some simple, inevitable arc of progress, but as hard-won victories for the idea of an expanding democracy. And crucially, the book argues, these expansions were often led by marginalized groups who were demanding that the nation live up to its own founding promises. The author uses these two modern historical projects to show how this battle over the American story is still happening right now. The book analyzes them as two competing narratives, one that centers the nation's failures and contradictions, and another that basically erases them in favor of a mythological, perfect past. So after laying out this whole history of conflict, the author arrives at her conclusion about what all this means for the future of democracy today. So here it is, the crucial point. According to the author, there is no perfect mythologized past to return to.
The book argues that the real American story, the authentic one, isn't about a perfect past. It's about the constant, ongoing, and often really difficult struggle to make the nation's founding ideals true for everyone.
The author concludes that embracing this more accurate, more complex history, one filled with both profound failures and noble struggles, that's the key. It undermines the authoritarians' core tactic of selling a fantasy past and instead recenters the American story on the messy, inspiring, and unfinished work of expanding equality and freedom.
And so, the book leaves us with this powerful question. It suggests that history isn't just something that happened. It's a story we are constantly telling ourselves. And the version of that story we choose to believe in, well, that's what's ultimately going to shape what happens next. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.